The question I want you to ask yourself is, who is the most underrated character in your opinion? Now, think, then 10 minutes, you might have a new answer, a new perspective, a new way of thinking. I doubt I will make anyone have a new perspective, but I hope this will enlighten you nonetheless, and we can now get into why King was an underrated character. Okay, I'm cheating. He's not as underrated now as he was back in Season 1, as you probably know, but I still think we should look at that Season 1 and ask, what's the change there? What happened? And I think the best way to start is with his character progression. So to start off, we have a pretty easy starting point to look at it. Now, this episode is mainly about Luz coming to the Boiling Isles, meeting Ida, King, and the whole world, but that's in 5 minutes. Now we're done with that. We're looking for King's crown, and it's his introduction. And it's fine. It's fine. It's alright. The main problem is that you don't really understand where his character is going from here. You will understand once we get a bit more into it, but from here, not so much. And that's kind of a theme for the first episode, because it's off, you know? All the characters are a little bit weird, like you don't see them act the way they do later on. It's the only time where the sincere dialogue you're supposed to feel amongst the characters comes off as cringy and does the, we're weird and that's okay, but they're also public menaces. And I don't know how it happened, but this is never a problem for the rest of the show, and it's only here. And the episode is only saved because it's plot relevant, but then again, you have to watch it again. And I don't know why I just have this weird hatred of the first episode. It's not what you came here to do, so I'll drop it. If you want me to actually explain more why I don't like it, I'll be happy to do so, but not right now. Now we have to go on to... This episode is where King's character properly gets started. It's a lot better, and it characterizes him way more. It's the episode where he starts to act like Luz's little brother, which, if you've seen the show, which I hope you have, it's amazing. It's just a staple he has for the rest of it, and it's good it starts this early, because a lot of the emotional beats that we'd have later would just completely fall flat if sort of this characterization didn't start now. I like it a lot. They use this sibling dynamic so you can sympathize with King. If you're a little sibling, you probably remember a time where you want your older brother, sister, whatever, to hang out with you, to be into something you want, but they're just not. They can't change that. And this is exactly what we see here. In the episode, it's explored quite nicely in a great way, as it is I swear every time, not being sarcastic here, every time in Season 1 for any of King's stories. For an example, let's look at... Surprise! I lied. If you remember, this episode is split into 3 parts with Ida, King, and Luz all having their own sections, and surprisingly, you don't learn the most about King through King's section, but instead through Ida's, so we're gonna look at that. So King's argument is that he's babied a lot, and that's what makes him have the most miserable life, and no one thinks that being babied and pampered is bad, so when Ida takes over his body, she experiences being kidnapped. King is also later kidnapped, but he's in Luz's body. Luz is also then in the same section later, but she is in Ida's body. And this is not going to be confusing at all, because by the end, they all switch back, and then they switch other people's bodies, but then it doesn't matter after, because as you might have guessed, this episode just drops everything it starts out with. That whole King is too babied and pampered argument is literally never brought up a single time before or after this, and it leads to it being one of its worst episodes. If you want to know more about this, because I'm going to move on here in a second, there's a great video by Castrium which goes in depth and is really well made, and I recommend checking it out. I'll have a link. But now that that's over, we will talk about... An important part about King's character is that he has a dream, as all good characters should, so that we have an idea of what we're building to. He thinks that he was the king of demons, but now he wants to be the king of demons again. Skipping to the end of the episode, in one of his I'm sorry speeches, which are shockingly numerous, he says that being famous is the closest he will ever get to achieving that dream, which later on in the video, I will go on to explain why that does not age well at all. But since obviously this isn't later in the video, we will talk still about now, because this episode is better than the last one. But it's not great, and it mainly comes down, in my opinion, to the I'm sorry speech King has at the end, because he's almost gotten both himself and Luce killed, and it's never talked about again. None of the characters even come back from the end of this episode, and that's a bit disappointing. And it's a good thing the show doesn't keep up with King's apology problem, because it would probably be distracting and maybe make his character feel a bit weaker. And that, of course, doesn't happen in this next episode called Ha Ha Ha, I lied to you again, because the episode absolutely does the exact same thing as the last one. It's almost the same episode. If you just take away this gimmick of everyone shrinking down that makes everyone say that this and Gravity Falls is the same show, then this episode and Sense and Insensitivity is just the same thing. And if you want to hear my argument for this episode, just go back about 30 seconds or so, and you'll have it, just to show you how similar these episodes are. But that's it. After really small problems, there's no more King episodes for Season 1. They were some of the least popular, and though some could relate to King, and almost certainly everyone loved King, he had few that liked him, if that makes sense. Ultimately, he ended up just being someone that you could imagine taking over the main character's body rather easily. To prove my point, we can look at the Owl House subreddit's episode poll that just finished a bit recently, and if we look closely, all of the episodes that I had just mentioned are ranked rather low on the list. After everything the show tried, you just couldn't find King among people's favorites. And he just failed to resonate with people the way you wanted. So it's just time to give up, right? Well, if we go back to June 26th of 2021, you're relaxing in the air conditioning to escape the heat, or not, I have no idea where you live. Obviously, you want to celebrate because it's National Praline Day. But what's this? It's the perfect thing to celebrate with. One of your favorite shows, The Owl House, is releasing a new episode, and it's called... I do not want to talk about how absurdly proud of that segue I am, because instead, I want to talk about how King goes from Season 1 to Season 2. Like most characters making that transition, the season goes a bit more into his past, digs a little deeper, and just digs up a lot of buried trauma. For King specifically, a lot of it deals with his insecurities about himself, where he's from, and what he's going to do after everything is over. Deals a lot with, what is his past, where is his future going, and he can only really find any sort of happiness in sight right in front of him. It's the present. That's where all good memories are for King. And for an episode, of course, called Echoes of the Past, it deals with King's past, and he finds out he was never the king of demons to begin with. And it's great, and it's entertaining, because we as viewers get to watch King overcome this huge misconception he's had about his entire identity from the start of the show. Except in that one episode I mentioned earlier. Remember it? Sense and Insensitivity? Where he talks about how the only way he's ever going to achieve his dreams by being famous. You see how that's stupid now? If he literally believes that he's king of demons up until this episode, Echoes of the Past, and not all the way back in Season 1, and how it doesn't fit now? I know it's something minor and I shouldn't really get mad at it, and I'm not really that mad. But minor stuff can really affect the audience for a while and be very important to the plot. I mean, just look at... It's like I said about Minor, King has a very small role in this episode as it mainly focuses on Ida, obviously. But I just wanted to say, so that I can bring it up, that this is where King legally, permanently, and officially gains Ida as a mom. We're done with the weird roommate thing that they did selectively back in Season 1, as it's just a mother-son relationship from this point forward. And now that King has found a mom, he's now on the search for his dad, which will make up a significant portion of the remainder of his character arc, because now he's looking for that future we were talking about. Although in the next episode he's still sort of focusing on his past, he does move forward a little bit with his arc. It's a third of the episode, and I'm sure you remember this episode, but of course this moment gets overshadowed by Lumity, because like I said, of course it does. This is the Owl House fandom we're talking about. And this episode with Lumity that I'm specifically talking about, you of course know it. It is... If you do not remember King's section of the episode, please go watch it. I recommend you watch all of the episodes we're talking about, but specifically this one, because I think it has the second best of King's speeches in the entire series, with the most hard-hitting lines. Because here, King is going through demon puberty, and he's trying to figure out what he'll look like, what he's sort of expecting when he's older, because this is a question that you could, just ask a parent, but obviously for someone like King, he doesn't have a genetic guardian looking over him, so now he has to go through Hooty, which is how you know it's a desperate moment. But obviously, if you've seen the episode like I've recommended you do, he doesn't find anything, but what does he learn from the episode? He doesn't learn anything about himself, really, but he does gain a new power. He gains the squeal. He also starts writing that next really sad speech. This part at the end here is sort of like a notes section because I don't have a good transition to the next part. But I remember everyone saying, oh, this is just going to be a filler episode. It's called Knock Knock Knocking on Hooty's Door. It's just going to be fun. It's going to be a clean episode. Everything's going to be fine. No one was expecting this to be the most plot-relevant episode of the season so far. I remember people freaking out and all of a sudden loving Hooty after this. But specifically, people also started hating him more because he ate the letter that was addressed to King. And we were all like, oh no, King's dead, we're going to have to wait longer for that. But then, of course, if you've seen Edge of Tomorrow, then this is absolutely a good thing that Hooty did. And even his supposedly viewed as evil action he has in this episode, you end up really liking later on because of that context. And it's really cool how Hooty just makes every correct decision a character can make in this episode, and some people still hated him after it. Up next we got, which has nothing to do with King, but officially marks the day that Amazon misdated an episode by 12 years. But what's actually up next is Disney shotgunning King episodes at the end, so we will be talking about the following episodes as a whole. Followed by... And we're done with that joke now, so don't worry about it. But here we get the conclusion of King's character arc for Season 2, because I assume we're going to get more of that in Season 3, or else what are we doing here? Other than looking at Edge of the World, which kickstarts King's emotional finale, and, in my opinion, his best speech he has to date. Remember earlier when I said second best? This is the best one, because it's emotional, it's far more relatable than the first one, and that ending of, you know the line, I'll show it here.
I want to go home.
But in that final speech I mentioned, he learns the most crucial part of his past. His dad, who he's been looking for, is Vermont, essentially. And if you don't get that joke, I'll simplify it, because King is a Titan. He's the son of the Titan, the big Titan we've been on the entire time. And now he has to deal with that massive weight of realizing that, oh no, he is kind of the king of demons, actually. Now we're going to take a pause right here to talk more about two of his speeches that I feel like are worth mentioning. His speech from Knock Knock Knockin' on Hooty's Door, and his speech from this episode we were talking about, his I know you're going to leave speech. Both are well-crafted scenes that brilliantly show us how King is feeling emotionally at that time, but I feel confident in saying that you probably had a stronger connection to this one. Which is not to say that this one is better than the other, because I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that more of the audience will be able to connect to the I know you're going to leave speech for one simple reason. You can relate to it. You don't even have to run a thought experiment by hopping into his shoes because the show does it for you. A speech like this proves your connection to the show. You can relate to King here because you are King. You know by this point the show has a shortened season 3. Even if you don't, you can feel the end approaching. With that feeling in the back of your mind, you love the journey, but you're scared of the destination, just like King is. And it's very clever how they do that, because instead of just doing a normal, he is relatable to the audience speech, now we are in the exact same position as King. It's that relatable that he is a stand-in for the audience's emotional state, and it's also a way to explore his character way more deeply than they ever could before. I feel a quote from Dana Terrace will really sum up a lot of my positive feelings about King and his speech and the show as a whole. The magical world and the magic that the characters use are always a framing device for the grounded, emotional stories we're trying to tell. So I want us to think about how this applies to King. And I also want you to stop thinking about why I made her a very posh, weird British person. If we look at this stripped away from the magical world or the wacky hijinks, what we have left is a kid who's on the search for a family that is always tantalizingly one step away every time. And that's how I view King, personally, but I also want to know how you view King, because that's the beautiful thing about storytelling. Everyone has a different viewpoint, a different angle, and it's so interesting getting to see that other point. I have seen many people watch the show and think of Hunter as like a trans allegory, and I don't see that, but I find it so cool that other people can, and I just don't think a story is complete without the audience. Now that we're wrapping up, I think I'll answer that question I left at the start, which you've probably answered yourself by this point based on the context provided. But in season 1, they never quite got King right. He was fine and I loved him all the same, but none of his episodes delved into him in a satisfying way. And if you look at the character popularity poll, his episodes are the worst, as I've said. But it's not until season 2 that they come into their own and they explore it. So, if anything, I want you to take this as a lesson that, getting something right takes time, and this just needed a bit more time in the oven, because it's amazing now, and King is one of the most popular characters of the show thanks to it. But now, I want to leave you with a question I can't answer. What do you think? Like I've said, the audience is such a big part of a show, and I need to know, what do you think? Do you see this the same way as I do? Is there something you want to add? I can never get this right on my own, so please help.
What does Luce know about problems anyway?